these past few days. So we're going to have a panel here, and I'm going to introduce all of our speakers. So Justin DeFore. Justin is a successful entrepreneur who's built several businesses ranging from SAP EOM software companies, 4 global brands, and legal cannabis producer processor in operator state of Washington. Justin, go ahead and give a wave. Okay. Paul Lintelak is co-founder and chief information officer of Trace. He has more than 6 years of experience with blockchain and data science. Give a wave. Yeah. Karen Tobin. Karen Tobin is the chief executive officer and chief compliance officer at Green Lion. So, are we missing Kimberly? We must be. We're missing Kimberly.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Stein, almost 40 years in the legal cannabis profession. Co-founder of Jobs for Autism, hemp farmer, and consultant at to the cannabis industry on industry-specific issues. Go ahead, give a wave. Okay, David Kramer. David Kramer is an attorney in Vincent Sederberg's Los Angeles office and a member of the firm's corporate and business hemp and cannabinoid practice groups. His practice focuses on helping commercial cannabis and hemp clients navigate the ever-changing regulatory landscape. So these are our panelists, and we will be taking questions from the audience. So before we get started, let's take a poll of the audience, okay? Raise your hand if you're physically able to and willing to do so if I raise. Okay, so that's like a 1% success rate for raising hands. So we're not going to do that. Yeah, another question was raise your hand if you're able to. Okay, thank you. Sorry, not clear enough. Thank you. So raise your hand if you currently are farming hemp on any scale at all. Okay. Raise your hand if you are aspiring to be growing hemp. Okay. Raise your hand if you have a job in the cannabis industry that doesn't involve growing hemp at all. Okay. Cool. So now we kind of know who we're dealing with. I appreciate that. So this is open to all panelists. So can we clarify the legality currently about growing hemp? And you can be specific to California, or you can talk about nationally. Anybody want to just broad strokes?
Yeah. Oh, do you want to go? Go ahead.
I'll hit the general really quick. You know, as we all know, the Farm Bill got passed, right, which is great for us. The feds have basically said that we're going to make an industry out of industrial hemp. Now, how that industry is going to be defined in terms of the rules and regulations, they have not defined, right? It's still up in the air in terms of what that's going to look like. What they have said is that they're going to defer to the states. So if the states have a program, that's what's going to be controlling until they've come out with their rules. And again, with the way that the law works, the federal set up the minimum, right? If the states want to incorporate additional compliance and additional rules on top of it, they can. So the Fed law basically says these are going to be the bare minimum requirements that a state is going to have for a federal program, right? There will be a compliance type of system where you're going to have to do reporting. Hopefully it's not what we're doing with normal cannabis today, right? That's a little overkill in my opinion, especially for industrial hemp purposes. So hopefully it's going to be more on a batch general ag. There's a couple laws out right now that are supposed to treat cannabis like alcohol. In my opinion, I think for certain regulatory purposes that would be great, right? As long as you don't follow certain distribution models that they've done in states. So that's my general. Every state has their own rules, so you have to look at each state.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Yeah, well, go ahead, speak up.
From my own experience, last year there were only 2 states before the Farm Bill was signed. Your mic is kind of. You can hold it. Yes, last year there were only 2 states in which it was legal to grow hemp and to transport it. That was Oregon and Colorado. I ended up in Oregon last year, and we grew some hemp. I grew it myself, never grew it before, worked out fine, but then transportation was a problem. taking it across state lines was supposed to be good, but coming to California was not a problem, although there were people that I came across who did have problems, such as being stopped at the ag stops. And even though they had the paperwork and it was federally legal, below .3, as was mine, there's nothing to stop law enforcement from saying, well, how do we know your papers are not fake? How do we know that's not really marijuana? Ours looks exactly like the finest marijuana. It smelled for miles around, and we were fortunate. But one of the people that warned me about transporting it, once the Farm Bill was signed, he decided to get a licensed and bonded shipping service, sent it to Colorado through Idaho. As soon as he got to the weigh station, the dog smelled something in it. Idaho is still to this day, even though the case has now been dismissed, bragging that they made the biggest marijuana bust in the history of the state, 7,000 pounds. He took him almost 3 months to get his stuff back. The driver was faced with a 5-year minimum, had to be bailed out to the tune of $150,000. And that can happen anywhere, even now. Now that the bill was signed, there's more action, more activity, and it's just like a speed trap in certain small cities. It's a revenue base. What's going to stop? You know, you could have all your licensing, all your paperwork. Police could still say, we don't really care. They seize your stuff. 2 months later, when you get it back, after it's laying in a wet evidence room, it's not really worth anything anymore. So that has to be changed, and there's ongoing negotiations in different areas, but right now, because the Farm Bill was passed, it doesn't really make it an open and shut situation. So that has to be worked on as well, and that's only involving transportation. And there's a lot of other aspects of this that just signing something into law doesn't mean that people are going to abide by it.
Thank you. Yeah.
My crim law teacher had a great saying that went right in line with that, right? Which is, you might beat the rap, but you're not going to beat the ride, which means they're going to take you to jail, right? You may get out and it's found that the case will be dismissed, but the guys working the ground, if they think it's cannabis, they're going to take you in, right? Which you're going to get that ride, but you may beat the rap.
Yeah, maybe I can weigh in here a little bit. First of all, I just wanted to mention that actually I was not originally the one who was going to speak on this panel. This is my co-founder and the CEO of Trace over here, but he unfortunately got in a bit of a concussion a few days ago, so I'm sort of taking his place. But my background's more in the tech. But for example, in Vermont, we're a Vermont-based tech company, and like you mentioned earlier, there's the federal regulations, which I believe state that has to be below 1%. As a maximum, but then they can allow the states to make different percentages on a state-by-state basis. He's the real lawyer here. It's probably the right order to do things, so he can correct us all. But another thing to bring up is testing, chemical testing. They put these limits on the amount of THC that could be in the product, but they don't specify, the mechanism by which you do that. That's left up to the states. So, even, for example, there's some kind of loopholes in that process, like the fact that you have decarboxylation happening in the THC in the plant. So THCA is going to degrade into delta-9 THC, which is the most active ingredient. However, the limits at the federal level are only placed on delta-9 THC. So but they left open the question of how you actually take into account that decarboxylation process, which last time I checked was still a bit of a loophole. But anyways, I'll hand it off to you since you know more what you're
I think a lot of people hit the high points here, but a couple of things to note. Farm Bill on its face says explicitly that hemp and hemp products are allowed to be transported across and through every state in this country. What's happened on the ground, though, is that there have been some states like Idaho and Oklahoma and other conservative states that have said, yeah, we know what it says, but that only applies to hemp that's grown pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill, which right now is 0. There is no hemp in the ground that's been grown in compliance with the 2018 Farm Bill because we're still waiting on USDA to issue regulations so that we know how to grow hemp pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill. So all of the hemp in the country right now is being grown pursuant to the old Farm Bill, the 2014 Farm Bill. And conservative states like Idaho and Oklahoma have said, well, that interstate transport provision we have in the Farm Bill, that doesn't apply to 2014 Farm Bill. That case actually was decided in favor of the Idaho State Police in Idaho And it's up in appeal right now in the Ninth Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals that governs, obviously, California and the western part of the United States. There's a hearing on this on August 28th that we'll be at and we're involved in. And we're hoping we get a good reversal, because Judge Bush, who's the judge out in Idaho, sort of bent over backwards to issue an opinion that made no sense.
Is that where the phrase ninth circle of hell comes from?
I guess if you're a Republican, possibly, I don't know.
Anyway, so thank you for those contributions. So specifically for California, because we are in California, what does the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board do, and what kind of role does it play, if any, for California farmers?
Well, I guess, anyone else?
Go for it.
Take it.
So they're a statutorily required body under California's hemp laws, the Food and Ag Code. They're supposed to give advice and sort of consult with legislators up in Sacramento about how to issue sensible regulation. It's been a very slow go. Hemp was legalized on Prop 64 back in November 2016, and until April of this year, we didn't have a single regulation from them on this topic. That changed at the end of April. Now you can actually register to grow with your local county ag commissioner. It's a very, very easy process. It's nothing like the cannabis regulations, thankfully. And in theory, the Hemp Advisory Board is supposed to be issuing on an ongoing basis more regulations to assist in the process. They've done a little bit of a better job this past quarter. We now have actual testing and sampling regulations that are actually really good and sort of a model for some other states. But that being said, there's still a long ways to go. There are other bodies that are more involved in putting forward legislation. There are two huge pieces pending right now. One is called AB 228, and one is called SB 153. Am I veering off course here?
No, please.
I'll give you the Cliff Note version. Right now, technically speaking, all of the gummies that you see in the stores that have CBD in them are technically unlawful in the eyes of the state. 228 seeks to rectify that and sort of make what's already happening on the ground firmly legal. And then SB 153 is supposed to make California's hemp cultivation program fully compliant with the 2018 Farm Bill. As was said earlier, the 2018 Farm Bill gives a tremendous amount of deference to the states to issue regulations on how hemp will be grown, and 153 is California's effort to do that.
Thank you very much.
A couple points to note in regards to AB 228 is it also is something that allows for co-production in the state of California, which is going to be a unique circumstance for the supply chain outside of cultivators due to cross-contamination and obviously higher than 0.3% THC. In addition to things like gummies, like you referenced, they're not just illegal in the state of California, but CBD infused products are still federally illegal. You'll see in different states, New York City is a hot one where the health departments come in and pull things off the shelf. So I think this is just an outline of, there's a lot of confusion on multiple levels and will continue to be this way for a couple years.
In that regard, I just read a letter regarding a company, I believe it's called Cure CBD.
Curaleaf.
Pure Leaf, yeah. And I read
FDA.
the actual letter the other day, it just popped up somewhere. And it was a warning letter from the FDA telling them that they had better fixed various issues. There were probably about 50 different issues that were pointed out relating to representations that were made. You can't claim it relieves pain, you can't claim it's going to fix any condition, and it's kind of hard to market some of these products if you fail to do so, but I don't know how this is going to turn out or how they're going to work it out, but that's part of the problem right now.
Yeah, another issue that we've run into in our working with test facilities and developing protocols around those testing, that testing regulation is, what do they do if they receive hemp that's hot? What is the actual recourse there? Do they burn it? Does it need to be seized? Like, they didn't do anything wrong, so maybe one of the things Trace is trying to do is help the test facilities have not as much liability there and have some actual protocol for how they deal with hot hemp when they receive it, if and when they receive it, without putting themselves at risk because they didn't do anything wrong. So that's another thing that we're trying to fix at Trace.
Thank you. So we touched on the illegality of infused products. So this was a little farther down on my list of questions, but it seems like a good time. We see a lot of food establishments that have, get your Jamba Juice with CBD now, or, get a shot of CBD in your Frappuccino. Are any of these facilities operating within the bounds of the law? And if not, how do you see that changing? How do you imagine the future? So it can't be wrong here. It's a prediction.
Well, the answer is no. None of them are legal right now. They're all illegal on both the state and federal level. FDA had a public comment period that just closed on July 2nd. That's the Food and Drug Administration. They're the ones who have the laws on the books that say you can't sell this stuff in food products. I prefer the word ingestible products, but it's more the same, dietary supplements and traditional food products. They're currently figuring out a pathway forward, or so they say, to allow for these products. There's a couple of solutions being floated. One is, instead of having CBD isolate, it will be full spectrum hemp. There's a pathway forward for that, arguably, under some law. And the other one is dosage control. So whereas Epidiolex, the average serving, you're closer, I believe, to 70 milligrams of CBD, perhaps over-the-counter products could be closer to 20 milligrams. We'll wait to see what happens on the FDA front. They've warned it could take 2 or 3 years for this to get sorted out. Senator McConnell, who has all of a sudden become a champion of the hemp industry because all hemp is being grown in Kentucky, and people who are traditionally growing tobacco no longer have those fields to grow. So he said he might introduce independent legislation on this point. I think there's a good shot that'll be the pathway forward.
Thank you. So get it while it's hot. Right. Go get your CBD juice while you still can.
And actually having labeling that's accurate too is another roadblock. There's been a lot of studies that have come out in recent years. I think there's a Nature article in 2018, I just saw another one in The Economist about how in California specifically, I think is where the test was done, there's significantly inaccurate labels after they retest. And that's both over-exaggerating and under-exaggerating, though it tends to be biased towards exaggerating it on the upside. But the labels are largely inaccurate, so I think we need to build confidence in the actual labels in order to have regulators kind of acquiesce to some of these legal efforts. So.
That's a whole nother ball of wax. I mean, how hard is it to understand just normal labels, right? I mean,
Right.
they need to just make labeling in general much easier for the consumer to understand.
Absolutely.
And it needs to be universal.
Yes.
So, one of the goals of this panel is for us to give you insight on how to maneuver the legalities of CBD as we try to build an industry. Be prepared for confusion. Be prepared for unknowns. A lot of us look at this compliance on a daily basis, and it's something that is literally a full-time job. And you come out on the other side sometimes still not knowing the answer. And that's going to continue to be the process, but you need to be prepared for that to successfully build an industry or a business in this industry. You can do it. It's totally doable, but be prepared for these kind of roundtable discussions of these unknowns for at least 3 to 5 more years.
Yeah.
Be prepared to pay a
And to
lawyer.
elaborate on that, right? I mean, we all understand this is an emerging market, right? That's why we're all here, right? The opportunity is amazing all the way around. This doesn't happen every day. This is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with a prohibition globally happening on the cannabis product, and then hemp coming right behind. I think the hemp movement is going to be bigger with all the industrial uses that can be applied, more than just the medical base that a lot of us are looking at. So as this emerging market grows, you're going to see the legalities change. So you need to be able to get in a mindset that adaptability and adoption of these new laws on the front line of your everyday process, it's got to be at the forefront of your mind, because if it's not, you're going to find yourself in a situation that could drastically inhibit you from going to market or functioning properly in the legal system, right? A great example of this is in California right now, right in the cannabis side. You're looking at these people who had temporary licenses that got cut off, right? And now they're looking at putting in legislation that probably won't happen, but allowing them to, if you had this temporary license, they're going to extend it and fast track you onto a permanent license. But if you didn't have that temporary license, right, then you're not even going to have a chance to get a permanent license. So if you didn't follow those steps at the beginning, then you got cut, you're going to get cut off in the market later on, right? So try to stay abreast of what's going on. There are a lot of gray areas where it's not well defined. Those are great areas to operate if you're comfortable operating in them, right? I mean, that's what got the cannabis industry here. So always be smart, but you know, if you want to do it, get out and do it.
Well, and you mentioned having done something improperly in the first place being a barrier for doing things properly in the future. I know some states will prevent you from being able to apply for license if you have any kind of criminal record. So that is another reason to follow the rules as soon as possible, because it could prevent you from operating in the future.
Yeah.
While a lot of these requirements, regulations, bans, because of labeling seem a little arbitrary at times, especially if you are the one that has the product, you're manufacturing. I just heard fairly recently of a publicly traded CBD purveyor that, from what I understand, they're one of the largest in the industry, and people were getting sick from their product. And the labeling says one thing, but then why are these people getting sick? So some woman, I forget what state she was in, she did her own little watchdog agency voluntarily, and she tested their product at her own expense in a lab and found out that the products were adulterated with a substance called spice, which is, as far as I know, killed people, and cough medicine, dextromorphia, the main ingredient in Robitussin. And people were taking that, and there were several instances of people getting sick. But if you read the label was fine. So there's a lot of operators that are not really living up to commercially feasible standards, maybe because they don't know what they are. But that's not a result of not knowing what you're doing. That's intentional, or somebody doctored your product, but that still could kill people.
Yep, I think one thing to bring up there is that a lot of times, I've heard of similar stories of people retesting products, and actually a lot of them, the test facility actually reported accurate results, but what will happen is they actually doctor the data. They change the data along the supply chain, and that's what our focus is trying to secure the data, because you can't prevent people from lying, but at least you can prevent people from fudging the data along the way, I think. I also just really wanted to quickly answer on something you touched on earlier, which was the focus of the hemp regulations on the batch level and the lot level, as opposed to the current regulations in medical or recreational in California, for example, where you have to tag every individual plant with an RFID chip. And I would say that that's kind of a sign of hope for me, for hemp and for the whole industry as a whole. It's just a much less burdensome system. It's a lot more common sense than what you see in other agricultural industries. Or other, like alcohol, things like that have psychoactive effects. I think the outcomes are going to be better there as well, because the less burden you put on people, arbitrary burdens that you put on people, the more people are going to come into the regulated legal markets. In California, we've seen the opposite. There's been a massive it's undershot the estimated number of applications and movement into the legal market. And this, in 2018, actually the percentage of people who are operating legally actually dropped year over year from the previous year. So these onerous regulations of tagging every individual plant for recreational, I don't think are the way to do it. And I think the hemp style regulations are hopefully going to be proven to be more practical, and it still will protect consumers and the public health. So
yeah, and I think a lot of it too, again, when they're laying out these laws, I mean, this is where so much of a roundtable discussion helps when they're doing it, right? Is the laws that you'd put in for hemp that's going towards human consumption would be very different than the laws that you're going to establish for industrial uses of this product, because they're being consumed two different ways, right? So as long as they're taking the full spectrum of what the plant has the ability to do, you're going to, maximize the potential of what we have to do with it, right? But depending on what you do with it, you're going to find yourself in other legalities, right? I mean, one of the great things about hemp, we're all excited about the medical benefits of it, but you can make anything that you'd make out of gasoline or a petroleum product, you can make out of hemp, right? So there's an entire plastics industry you can get into. There's fuel industries you can get into. Now, these things are far away. Are we at capacity where you could start running fuel? No, we're not, right? But we could get there. Then you're going to have to get into fuel regulations, right? So, I mean, every industry that you go into, I mean, that's the beauty of it. We're talking about raw source material and the regulations around that. But what you take and do with that, there are going to be other legalities that you're going to have to deal with. So always keep it in mind.
Thank you very much. So I want to take a moment to see if we have audience member questions. So raise your hand if you've got a question. Please keep it brief and concise.
Hi, my name's Trey Freeman. I'm an attorney by trade, not in the cannabis industry. And one thing I've noticed, it's not just the little manufacturers that have issues with their labeling. CVS, the products they're selling in there are mislabeled. What it seems to be going on is that they're trying to not label it CBD so they can market it. If you put CBD on the label, then you can't market it the way you would if it's hemp oil, right? Because there's specific things you can't say for a consumable product. In terms of in terms of like how you stop this, like I have no idea, like I'm just getting into the industry myself. But it seems like the problem is that the FDA, you go until you get a warning letter from the FDA, right? And then once you get the warning letter from the FDA, then you have to make remediation. My question is, that process before you get the warning letter, like what's going on there? Like is there it seems like there's something needs to be done between the FDA process of when they're investigating companies for non-compliance or for mislabeling versus because I don't know, it just seems like they're trying to get profits. And
So your question is, what does the FDA do besides send warning letters?
Could I maybe hand this question off to their
He's
CEO
got
over
zero.
here? Keep it under 30 seconds.
I lose my train of thought after 30 seconds because I have a concussion right now. But the answer to your question is Trace, our company. What it is an iOS supply chain tracking application that each level of the hemp and CBD supply chain uses to document the basic facts that are important to either the market pricing of a product or the compliance status of a product. That information is integrated to the regulatory platforms used by state governments and other agencies. We're announcing our first government contract soon, and that creates a market standard across the entire supply chain that spells out very clear reporting requirements at each step of product state change and integrates that data to a state agency dashboard that they can use to issue recalls if a problem is discovered or just to simply monitor the economic development of an emerging industry. So that's how you solve the problem. So you create industry and market standards for how you get, share, and interpret data about products.
And can I add something here?
Absolutely.
As far as what the FDA is doing, that sounds like a great program for people on the brand side, but if the question is what enforcement is actually happening here, FDA has very limited resources, right? And this problem is one of the FDA's making. They have a law on the books that says you can't put CBD products in ingestible, CBD, excuse me, in ingestible products. It's called the drug preclusion rule. And they have that law on the books, and yet they have, over the last, I'll say 5 years, allowed this mass proliferation of CBD products with sending very, very minimal enforcement. The only companies that have gotten letters are companies whose products are considered over-the-line drug claims. Curaleaf, who got the letter this week that Jeff mentioned, was they had claims that said CBD helps kill breast cancer cells. No medical evidence that they had in their pocket to support that. They had claims that said this helps with chronic inflammation, you name it. And we all here want to believe that's true, and I'm not doubting it's true. But if you're going to make claims like that, the FDA wants to see the data. So our advice to clients is minimal claims, minimal health claims, and minimum drug claims, and you should be okay. That's the short answer. We could talk more after.
And to put that full circle, right, they would have done that to any company. It's not just because they were a CBD company. You could have created anything you wanted and called it, and you start making those types of claims, they're going to come down on you, right? That's really the reason.
I think we're going to see some of the best traceability for a consumable product in our country as a result of these two tracks in the industry. Our food should truly be traced in the way that these products are being traced. So I hope in 5 years we can sit back and go, remember when labels used to be really bad? Like, look how amazing this is now, and let's take what we did here and apply it to other consumables in this country, because the FDA is understaffed.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not just this market.
And I have another problem with the FDA I'd like to voice. You know, if you stockpile guns, they'll come after you with guns. But if you start making your own hooch, they don't come and have a drinking contest. So what's with that? Can we get any other questions from the audience? Is there anything else you guys have burning desire to know? Go up front.
Very specific question regarding transportation and risk mitigation or financial mitigation, financial risk mitigation. Any specific suggestions on how to do that, be it communication, forward communication to Department of Transportation, CHP, toting SOPs with you, COAs? Like, is there any specific guidance you could offer?
Carry the regulation in your vehicle.
All of the above. All of the
of it.
above are good ideas. I mean, if you're moving a large amount of weight and you're going to go through an agricultural checkpoint, it may not be a bad idea to let them know you're coming, right? I mean, think about the guy who's just on outside and he smells a truck full of weed. I mean, he doesn't know what it is. He's going to get the dogs. He's going to call his guys over, right? But if they know you're coming, it's a much different experience. So, I mean, it's not going to hurt you by making those.
Is there a transportation SOP that you're using?
Well, I can tell you, before the Farm Bill was signed, right before it was signed, I grew hemp up in Oregon, significant amount. I wanted to get it out of Oregon and bring it here to California. And I thought, well, we passed the state testing under .03. I was a licensed farmer. Everything was fine. We had a great crop. Nobody said that you couldn't transfer it to California and drive across. But I did speak to some of my peers in the industry there, including the person who was the owner of the company from the Idaho company. I never knew he was the CEO of the company because every time we heard him on the phone, he was driving a truck. Finally, I said, hey, how come you're always driving? He said, it's the only way I can be sure the shipment gets there. FedEx is opening up stuff, and UPS, and it's not safe anymore, and you'll never get it through. So he told me, he said, don't go through the agricultural stop. I'd been through the ag stops ever since I first came to California, probably thousands of times, just got waved through. So now we have trucks with thousands of pounds on there, and I said, oh no, what do I do? People said, go around it, do this, do that. Finally, somebody who had done it several times said, Jeff, if you go through it and you look like you have an attitude, or you look like you just came off the street, you got a joint hanging out of your mouth, maybe you'll have some problems. But if you have all your paperwork in order, you're well-spoken, you cooperate, shouldn't be a problem. So we didn't know what was going to happen. I took the chance, and I got up to the ag stop in Hornbrook. Young lady comes out and says, whew, I smell tons of weed. I said, no, it's not marijuana. It's industrial hemp. I'm a licensed farmer, have all my test results. She goes, honey, I don't care. It's all good. If it's marijuana, if it's hemp, it's the same thing. It's all legal. But if there's a CHP who didn't like your looks, or who had a bad day, or use her expression, had a bug up his butt, you're going to get driven off to jail and lose your stuff. But let's take care of this. Open up your back. I said, if I open the back up, we're going to be, an avalanche will befall us. I said, okay, open it a little bit. And I opened a little, said, okay, close it up. She said, sure smells good. Went back into the little shack, comes out with my little piece of paper, and I was good. And whew. But then, it's only since the Farm Bill was signed that I have heard now about all these horror stories.
You need to have a standard operating procedure, and unfortunately for hemp, you gotta kind of make it up yourself. We don't have regulations to follow. In states where cannabis is regulated, we know specifically what they're looking for, what needs to be reported to the state, all of those processes. So here, we kind of try and mirror it with hemp. Carry a copy of the regulations, carry all your permits, carry your license, make sure that person is an employee of your farm. I wouldn't try for hire. I would try and narrow your opportunity to run into a roadblock. Mostly, if you do run into a roadblock, it's going to be a roadblock because somebody's uneducated, right? That is what's going to happen, and you can help educate them with those documents so you can move along your merry way. But until those regulations are out on paper, it's going to be more gray for you to transport hemp than it is cannabis, because there's state regulations for transportation of cannabis.
And she brings up a good point, right? There isn't a lot of guidance there, but I would say look to the cannabis industry. It is one of the most
Absolutely.
regulated industries in the
Very
world,
regulated.
right? If you are mimicking their travel manifest and what they're doing, then it's going to help you if you ever get into a situation because you have the documentation, right? The other thing to kind of keep in mind in terms of transportation, right, is it's one thing, you know, you're transferring flour, right, with a known concentrate of 0.3 or less. This industry is about oil production, right? We do a lot of oil production. You've got to be careful if you're sending that oil sample across state lines after you've concentrated it down. You could have a higher than 0.3%. Now, there's no law that talks about that concentration level in concentrates because it seems like it's based on the wet or on the dry flour percentage, right? So because of that not being addressed, it's one of those areas that nobody can really tell you, what's going to happen if you get crossing that boundary with a concentrate higher than that. One of the gentlemen in another session brought some great insight to it, which he said, I put my flour COA with it, right? So they know that the flour that it came from as a work in progress is very smart. That way you can at least say, this is where it came from. It's not that we're,
Right.
If it was high THC, I'd be trying to go for 90, not
Right.
1%.
You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, a woman in Texas recently, Texas has been pretty stringent, if you want to say that, or foolish. She was in a wheelchair traveling with her CBD she took for pain that she bought legally over the counter, and the Texas Rangers, or whoever it was, arrested her at the airport. A lot of things going on in the airports because
It's like
of
a grandma,
federal jurisdiction.
right? Was
Exactly.
she like,
There was a Disneyland arrested.
Yeah.
However, a
right.
little good news
Wow.
for you that I was telling you about my experience, but now it's also my experience as we speak right now. We need to arrange helping somebody transport a very large amount of also approved under 0.3. It's coming here. And now, as opposed to when I did it, we have 3 trucking companies, all priced relatively reasonably, all providing insurance on the cargo that are willing to drive it right now.
Mhm.
So there's no need for anybody to drive their own at this point. I don't know what's going to happen. For all I know, it could be a big bust as well, but it seems like it's there's starting to be competition. I couldn't find one 5 months ago.
Yeah.
Now
yeah.
there's 3
Yeah,
that I
now,
know of
now
right
there's
now.
more. Well, thank you very much.
One
And I
other quick
think,
point on the transportation, sorry, USDA legal counsel, the USDA is going to be in charge of all this, just put out a memo about a month ago saying interstate transport of all hemp, whether grown pursuant to the 14 Farm Bill or 18 Farm Bill is okay, good to go. I'd have a copy of that memo with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the
Application was it? USDA what?
USDA's general counsel.
general counsel.
Also, for small shipments, you can use UPS.
Well, and I think the takeaway here is don't smoke cannabis while you're driving a truckload of it. Instead, stick to the methamphetamines. Do what the truckers do. You look like a trucker, you're okay.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question. I've got my stock questions, but if you guys have a burning question,
If you don't
then I don't
have
wanna-
one, I have a follow-up, but I don't want to hog the
well,
time.
give it a moment.
We like
So,
answering questions.
any other questions from the audience members? Going once,
It's all
going
you.
twice?
I actually just have one more
So,
quick comment
yeah.
on the transportation thing is, I think one thing that we have to consider is that the law enforcement officers are also stakeholders of this whole regulatory solution, so there needs to be something that makes it easy for them to be able to verify this stuff, and like, it's our opinion at Trace that it shouldn't be physical forms that they have to check, and looking at all these papers, it should be something really easy, like a barcode that can be digitally scanned. But yeah, I think that whatever the solution is that we come up with needs to think about law enforcement as a stakeholder.
Indeed. Tying the two together to a bit, and to give you a quick insight, I'm a California licensed manufacturer, distribution, and cultivation, so I certainly have respect for what you're saying, using those manifests and COAs. But the question is relative to ma'am, you'd said something about co-production clause in Assembly Bill 228.
228,
Are you
correct.
referring to a marijuana operator, licensed marijuana operator, being able to co-manufacture on the same facility?
That's correct.
And that language may come
clarity
out,
there?
just so you know, there's a lot of pushback on that. We'll know on August 12th.
I think there's pushback, but there is also some push forward. I think it's going to be.
I hope so. I hope so. I was at Sacramento last week, and we heard
Yeah.
pretty hard from people that said that's the one hang up right now. And it hasn't passed either way. I surely
Correct.
hope it is. I just don't want
I
you to
think
start.
it's the 12th, right?
Yeah, August 12th, that's right.
August 12th. So it does. That is the way that it is currently written. It allows for co-production in the same facility. So right now, commercial cannabis activity for a licensed premise can only do commercial cannabis activity and nothing else. And they're very clearly defined under your license types exactly what it is you can and cannot do. So that is within 228, but it sounds like it might come out. I hope it stays out.
I hope I'm wrong. I'm just telling you what I heard.
Yeah.
So I've got one more question, because we've just got a couple minutes here, and it's a super downer. So,
Boo.
do you think that there is any chance the American cannabis industry can be competitive against Chinese hemp in the next 10 years?
I don't know if we need to be. That's my thought process. We don't know where this industry is going to be tomorrow to figure these out on a state and U.S. level. We look at Canada. We looked how they jumped out first, started exporting, but I don't know. I don't know if we need to be or if we're so far away from those types of moments right now that we need to focus on being able to operate here on a day in and day out basis.
What I think is going to happen, just like with fish, there's no way in the world would I eat tilapia or any fish that came remotely from waters close to China or that were made in a farm anywhere, not only in Asian countries, but here.
Even if
Talk
it was
about
pennies
some-
on the dollar?
Even if it's pennies on the dollar, I'd rather not eat fish. That's what's going to happen. And what I've heard, right when I got into this industry, is that all of China is a very, you see people walking out, you look at Beijing and you see this gray skies all the time and very much pollution there. Doesn't just stay there, of course, but that's where it emanates from, a good deal of it. And hemp, cannabis-related plants, they leach. I mean, they're cleaning up Chernobyl with cannabis plants. And when you get it from a place that's not pure, when I had my first test done here, I brought my stuff down here to get tested, it came back from the lab on my crude oil with an addendum to it that said pristine with 6 exclamation points. So I called the lab to ask them what they meant. And they said they've never seen, there's no pesticides, we didn't know you were organic. I didn't intentionally try to be an organic farmer, I didn't get a certification, but I never used any insecticide or pesticide. The soil did have for 28 years organic crops grown in it, and you get what you put in. And
Yeah.
came out perfectly. People are gonna realize, oh, where'd that come from? And it's already happening, because from what I understand now, China wasn't even really participating in the oil. They're making hemp for years for farm. I had a client that used to send me shirts years ago, the best T-shirts, in a paper bag, and it was made of cotton. I said, why are these shirts so good? And then he sent me a couple of dress shirts, same thing. He saw some of my exploits on Facebook when we were farming, and he said, Jeff, remember those shirts I used to send you? I said, yeah. He said, we used to put cotton on the label just so we wouldn't have any problem getting them in, but they were really hemp. And they were some of the best quality shirts I ever had. I still have one,
There you go.
23 years old. Yeah.
And don't try to smoke this shirt. It doesn't,
No.
no, it doesn't work.
I did that already.
I think in terms of just the macroeconomics of this whole situation, what we should be going for is an industry where we're competing on quality and not competing on a race to the bottom with cost.
That's it.
And I think that's a shift that's been happening on a global macro level recently in terms of disentangling global supply chains a little bit. And there's a lot of factors that are at play there. Tariffs, just China is getting richer. There's a lot of things to think about there, but I do think that we're heading towards a market that's going to compete on quality instead of price, instead of cost. And that's why I'm actually pretty optimistic about American-grown hemp and Canadian and Mexican-grown hemp maybe, but I think Mexico would be more the international competitor probably than China. They're also drafting legislation that will probably come out in October for hemp.
Thank you very much.
They, I think it's all depends on how you look at it, right, with China. Are they going to be a competitive force in this space? You betcha. They've been doing it for a long time. I challenge people when you look at that, it's competitive in what way, right? There's so much we can do with this plant. I think because of that factor, we don't necessarily have to look at them as competition. We should look at it as what it is, a global economy in which we should be cooperating on a global level to get things done at the most efficient way, not just for us to have a cheap price, so that we can bring our quality product to them as well, right? I mean, that goes to your quality point, right? There's different varieties, there's different reasons to grow the plant, and I think if you focus on all of those different options, there's enough out there for everybody, right? Not just us in this room, but China and everybody else, because there's a lot that this plant can do. I mean, we can replace fossil fuels, right? I mean, you think China's going to do that alone? No, it's got to be everybody trying to make that push if that's the way you want to go with it.
And hopefully this plant will allow us to do that, because all of those steps and philosophy you just said should be our thought process for everything, right? To work together to achieve the best possible quality product, not just based on cost. So maybe this will give us an opportunity to kind of shift our thinking and work with countries in a different manner. We can help.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
how
unique.
great would it
It's a
be that in
unique
20
opportunity.
years of working with China, you go to visit and their air doesn't look like that, because we've gone to a carbon neutral or a carbon negative fuel source instead of using a fossil fuel.
It could be, except there's always other factors. Number one, what I was referring to, but didn't get it out, is China wasn't even making or participating in the oil. They have the uses. They never made CBD oil. They didn't have to. Then when it became such a hot industry, they needed to participate. So what they did, and they realized that any thinking person is going to realize that this stuff is completely contaminated if you're going to ingest it. So what started happening is they would launder their product, and there would be CBD oil that said product of Poland, product of Belgium. Didn't say made, created, whatever, product of, and that was started to be made with Chinese oil. And then just the other day, I was up in Oregon, and I was in a rest area talking to a logger with a logging truck. And it always kills me when you look up, you see these beautiful trees, and then you see a bald spot. And I said to him, we were talking about hemp, and I said, you know, you should get into the hemp business. I said, you wouldn't have to cut these beautiful trees down that take 70 years to regenerate. He said, well, every time we cut them down, we have to plant another one. I said, well, from what I understand, it takes over 70 years to grow back. He said, yeah, well, what do you expect us to do? He goes, we need the wood. I said, that's what I'm telling you.
You don't.
The hemp plant, you don't ever have to cut another tree to make paper, to make housing. There's already hemp houses that have been made, hempcrete, hemp plastic. And he said, yeah, but what's going to happen to my job? He says, they already closed enough logging mills up here. We don't need any more shut down. Well, get into another industry.
Your job will
drive
be a
the
lot
hemp the
safer
same way.
too than logging.
A little bit.
Lots
Well,
of-
it's funny you bring that up, because that goes back to why hemp was and prohibition started, right? William Randolph Hearst was a paper magnate, and he owned all the trees, right? So those trees go to zero value when you start growing hemp. It's a very interesting topic. If you guys haven't researched it, there's a lot of information out there.
Well, thank you guys very much for your contributions, your information, and for sticking it in and really take care of the cannabis.